Greetings, folks. With this lecture, I want to help you come to terms with a short video from the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB and malaria. After you have watched it, I will unpack what it reveals about global health politics today and how it relates to the broader themes of the course. This video makes it very clear that the Global Fund is all about funding global health programming. It is an especially good example in this way of how the politics of global health commonly gets framed today as a kind of investment project in which the return on investment is measured in lives saved. It issues a rousing call to donors to give more funds to the fund, a call targeted at wealthy country governments and their tax-paying populations to invest in the health of the world's poor. But as you watch it, think critically about who precisely in these populations the video is meant to address. It's a short 3-minute, 40-second pitch comprised of short cuts taken from a longer recording of a so-called pledging conference hosted by President Biden in New York City alongside a UN Assembly meeting when all the national leaders from UN countries were there in New York City. The Global Fund used this assembly meeting, like many before it, to get the same leaders to attend the pledging conference with a view to getting rich countries to pledge money to the fund. And you can tell that it's also aimed at a mass public audience too. It's got this energetic, thumping beat and lots of can-do cameo appeals by very good speakers talking about why funding the fund is important and yet not really getting into the politics of it. The phrase that comes out instead is the resounding and repeated call to fight for what counts. As you watch this, reflect carefully on how they're using this phrase, fight for what counts, and what sorts of counting it implies. I'm going to suggest to you in what follows that it points directly to the kinds of accountability politics that lie at the very heart of contemporary global health programming.
Diseases that knows no borders.
What counts to me is saving lives.
We need to defeat HIV, TB, and malaria.
What counts for me is that nobody have to die because they are poor, because they are marginalized, because they are stigmatized.
My friend Bono described this replenishment as a referendum on ourselves. Who are we? What kind of world do we really want?
The Global Fund doesn't simply save lives, as amazing as that is. It saves the future of our countries.
We are too Gen Z to die from treatable and preventable diseases like HIV, TB, and malaria. So world, what are you gonna do?
We are living through a dark and stormy time where things can seem so somber. But when I look at what we've done together, what I see is hope.
Now is the time to demonstrate our will to come together and march forward. That is what counts.
So let's fight for what counts together. Together, we can do it. Together, we must do it. The moment is now.
Thank you for fighting for what counts. This is all about saving lives. There's no ambiguity here.
The Global Fund Partnership has been able to save 50 million lives over the past 2 decades, precisely because on other occasions, just like today, the world came together and took bold action.
Ce combat que nous menons tous ensemble est loin d'être terminé. On doit donc avancer 2 fois plus vite. On doit redoubler d'énergie.
We will end AIDS, we will end tuberculosis, we will end malaria once and for all. This must be our pledge.
This investment in building resilience and sustainable health systems is critical. For the government and people of Malawi, this is not a conference, but a lifesaver.
Your contribution is a matter of life or death for millions of us. the Global Fund is one of the most innovative, results-oriented partnerships to ever be created in global cooperation.
The Global Fund itself, you could say, is the most important innovation of all.
The Global Fund, the partners announced it raised an astonishing $15.7 billion. And I think all I can say at this moment to begin is, wow.
I ask you to fight with us and with the Global Fund for the life of millions. Fight for our lives.
We have to ensure that everyone, no matter who they are, who they love, where they come from, can access care and treatment they need, period.
This is our fight.
This is what counts.
Fight for what counts.
So, fight for what counts. But what does count? Who is counted? And who does the counting? How many lives do the speakers claim counted in the sense that the Global Fund counted them as saved lives? And how is this simultaneously being framed for us as a form of return on investment? The video shows President Biden saying that there's no ambiguity here.
Thank you for fighting for what counts. This is all about saving lives. There's no ambiguity here.
So it's all about saving lives and counting those lives as lives that count. At one level, this really does seem simple. Fight for what counts means saving lives that count, that matter, that should be valued. But saving them from what? It also clearly means saving them specifically from just 3 big diseases: AIDS, TB, and malaria. So they're going to fight for what counts in terms of saving lives that could be lost to those big 3 diseases. This also seems pretty straightforward, except that the counting has a double meaning that actually is kind of ambiguous in practice. It certainly means both counting in the way President Biden meant it, namely lives that count because they matter, people who love each other, people who matter no matter where they live, the color of their skin, the language they speak, they matter. It seems clear that the president sincerely meant it too. That was the no ambiguity bit. But what I want to suggest to you now, and through the whole course as well, is that they count in a second way in global health politics. In short, they count in this second way as countable metrics. They count as numbers. And they are counted in this way by accounting number crunchers at the Global Fund. Peter Sands, the guy with the rather posh English accent, who is the director of the Global Fund, who talks in the video about how we are going to fight for what counts, is a key counter in this way.
So let's fight for what counts together. Together, we can do it. Together, we must do it. The moment is now.
Sands here articulates a dominant view in global health policy making circles that programming should be always and everywhere based on the principle of results-based funding. This metrics-based model of accountability is extremely influential in global health politics, in part because policymakers see it as a kind of antidote to partisan politics and national politics. But it nevertheless comes with its own political history and political economy that I would like to submit to you reflect the strong influence of other political actors in global health politics. Not least of all, it reflects the metrics-based model of accountability that comes from the world of finance. The Global Fund is called the Global Fund in part because it's operationalized like a mutual fund, like an investment trust. It raises money from donors who are treated like investors who are then encouraged to see a return on their investment, but not in terms of dollars, but in terms of lives saved. And this model of financialized accountability runs right through the way the Global Fund operates and how it raises money and why it operates the way it does in terms of distributing that money. Indeed, it even stretches at moments into arguments that the value of saving lives lies ultimately in saving economic fortunes and capitalist profitability too. Another sort of indicator of this background financialized model that's running through fighting for what counts is the influence of two other people that are featured in the movie. One of whom you will have already recognized. He's the Microsoft bajillionaire Bill Gates. So what does Bill Gates say in that short snippet that they have from him?
The Global Fund itself, you could say, is the most important innovation of all.
Now, this appeal to innovation is another intersecting influence in the call to fight for what counts. Bill Gates is famous for loving innovation, right? He's the Microsoft guy. He made his billions, which he's now poured into organizations like the Global Fund, into Gavi, the Global Alliance of Vaccines and Immunizations, and into the Rollback Malaria Initiative. He made that money by patenting a number of technological innovations, not least of all MS-DOS, which became Microsoft's bread and butter. MS-DOS was a monopoly product that Microsoft created and which ran for years as a dominant operating system for all the world's computers. This was an innovation that generated massive revenues for Microsoft, revenues on which the billions being given away by Gates were based. So he loves innovation, and he brought to the Gates Foundation his preoccupation with innovation and with getting a return on investment in innovation. In summary, he tends to argue that if you invest in global health, you get innovation and you get breakthroughs, particularly in technology. He loves the idea of technological innovations that can transform lives and help people live longer. And yet, then he sees the Global Fund as the greatest innovation of all, in part because it has totally institutionalized the same model of accountability and metrics-driven work that he brought from Microsoft to the Gates Foundation. Another person who echoes these accountability arguments in the video is Rajiv Shah, who was head of USAID, the US's development agency that distributes money from the US government to work on, among other things, health and development.
The Global Fund is one of the most innovative, results-oriented partnerships to ever be created in global cooperation.
Before working for the US government, Rajiv Shah had been working as the head of the global development vision of the Gates Foundation. When you know this, you also start to see all of the transformations in global health politics that have come with the rise of mega donors like Bill Gates and their influence. The politics is no longer just about governments like the US government, represented in the movie by Biden, or the French government represented by Macron, or the Malawian head of state, or even global health agencies and their leaders like the World Health Organization, who's represented in the video by Tedros Ghebreyesus. Instead, global health politics have borne witness to the influence of the Gates Foundation and other billionaire donors, and the logic of getting a return on investment that this donor class have brought with them. And interestingly, from the point of view of the politics of global health, this systematically reduces the influence and controlling authority of traditional political actors and of nation states in particular. Instead, nation states are all just invited to pledge money. They're reduced to being donors alongside the donor billionaires that they are unable to tax adequately anymore. This is all of a piece with the politics that the video at once communicates and assumes, yet also kind of conceals at the same time. It highlights that the governments and their politicians are not in control of the Global Fund. Instead, it's operating like a financialized entity on the global stage, and it's collecting money from donor governments. The US government's the biggest donor, and its pledges amount to being like matching gifts. The point here is that national politics, democracy, and executive power gets subordinated to an accountability regime set up by the philanthrocapitalists demanding a return on investment in lives saved. These shifts relate in turn to one of the main things you're going to be investigating in this class. When you do your own Global Fund assignment, you will put in a mock application from an eligible poor country to the Global Fund for resources. As you do this assignment, you'll also find that if rich countries are subordinated to the logic of accountability, poor countries are confronted by an even starker affront to their sovereignty and authority. They go on bended knee to the Global Fund, and they have to do everything they possibly can in this way to comply with its accountability logics to get their money. The course and the assignment will teach you how that process works and help you to understand what it's like to be a leader of a poor country or a leader of their Ministry of Health, trying to put a pitch in front of the Global Fund about the desperate need to save lives. In this way, you will start to see the limits of the political regime established by the fund, and ultimately the limits of what counts. Because if you've got lots of women dying in childbirth, do they count? The answer is no, unless they were also suffering from AIDS, TB, or malaria. So no, they don't count so much. And what about children getting starved to death or stunted because they're malnourished? Do they count? Not if they don't have AIDS, TB, or malaria. In these sorts of ways, you start to see the limitations of this most successful of all global health agencies. While it is successful in terms of raising and distributing money, it's extremely limited in what it allows recipients to do with the funds. It's targeted and it's disease specific. And there's a history to this limitation and its politics that goes all the way back to colonialism, as we will review in the lecture on colonial health history and its legacy effects on contemporary global health. Are there any other politics you saw in the video? Perhaps the next most significant one beyond the financialized regime of accountability is the influence of global health philanthropy. There is a kind of compensatory logic to this that we will look at later in the course in terms of what I call a new Washington consensus that responds with compensatory forms of market foster care to the damage done to global health by Washington consensus market fundamentalism. This is not a simple matter of guilt and shame. It's something much more complex. And it's worth remembering that there are other donors out there, other wealthy philanthropists like the Koch brothers, that give their money to deeply conservative causes. Global health philanthropy is definitely distinct from this. The new Washington consensus is a departure from the old Washington consensus that good growth would lead to good health automatically. Instead, it flips the old logic around and it says investments in good health will lead to good growth. So you hear someone like Rajiv Shah saying, like, this is the way to prosperity for the world. We have to invest in health to get to wealth. This is the main new consensus point that defines the new Washington consensus. And it's an ethos that you can see running through much of the Global Fund video and others that fight for what counts in the language of investment. For all these reasons, I hope that unpacking this video example was useful for you as a way of understanding not just the work of the Global Fund, but one of the most dominant logics defining global health politics in the contemporary moment. Thanks a lot for watching. Greetings everyone, I'm Matt Spark and I am delighted to serve as your professor for this course, GCH 186, on global health politics. Today, I want to introduce the overall course design and explain how the account of global health politics that it offers is informed by what our textbook usefully introduces as a biosocial approach. This is an approach to global health that underlines how we need to draw together from both the biological sciences and social sciences to understand global disease burdens, and which also insists that any biomedical responses to the associated health problems calls for social analysis of the political and economic determinants of ill health, alongside biomedical expertise. I'm going to explain this approach by unpacking this extraordinary Diego Rivera mural, which I'm using in the course syllabus and on Canvas to illustrate the ways in which social and biomedical considerations can be brought together. So this is the order of the lecture. First, I'm going to talk about the course and its overlapping arcs and learning objectives. Then, second, I'm going to outline the practical, logistical aspects of the course from your own student point of view, including how to navigate the course Canvas pages and how the different assignments are going to be graded. And then third, we will circle back to what the textbook's biosocial approach entails by revisiting the Rivera mural and thinking about how it might be updated to make sense of the global health politics that we recently saw during the COVID pandemic. So first, the arcs of the course. Let's get into that. Here is what I say in the syllabus. This is a course that explores both the political economic determinants of health globally and the ways in which global health policy has evolved to respond to the resulting challenges and suffering. In doing so, it traces two arcs, one in which market forces repeatedly undermine health systems and outcomes, and another in which societies, governments, organizations, and individuals continue in diverse ways to struggle for health justice and health improvements. Now, this language of arcs comes from a great movie that many of you have already seen, and yet which we're going to watch again later on in this course because it's so important. The movie is entitled Bending the Arc, and it tells the story of the efforts by Partners in Health, the global health organization started by Paul Farmer and his colleagues in Boston, to work towards improving health for all globally by bending the arc of history towards health justice. The notion of the arc of history here is a hopeful one. It comes from a quotation from the 19th century abolitionist and Unitarian minister Theodore Parker that was famously adapted later on by Martin Luther King. King claimed thus at Selma and elsewhere that, quote, "The moral arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice," unquote. Partners in Health builds on this hopeful idea by suggesting, like President Obama suggested himself, that the bending needs active work to happen, that it's not just automatic, that the arc needs to be actively bent. And in promoting this health justice activism, Partners in Health activists, like Paul Farmer, have also had to confront this other arc that has tended to bend the arc of history the other way towards health injustice, and what our textbook describes as the political economic damage to health systems inflicted by neoliberal policies and market forces. So both the movie Bending the Arc and our textbook effectively introduce both of the arcs that we will be tracing in the course. In doing so, they also introduce another key term which we will be revisiting a lot. This is diagonalization. When health justice advocates take the vertically targeted disease-specific funding from organizations like the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria, and then use it to also strengthen horizontal health systems and inclusive primary health services, it gets called diagonalization. And for Partners in Health, this diagonalizing effort is also a form of bending the arc. It's a form of bending the arc towards health justice. They see themselves in this way as arc benders. They are also pushing back intellectually in this way against the old Hegelian notion that history has an inevitable endpoint, or so-called telos, to which we are all just destined no matter what we do. Instead, they say, we can pursue opportunities for making history better and more just, albeit not in circumstances that any of us can just choose. Instead, the struggle for health justice has to contend with market forces that constrain what can be done and limit opportunities for making the vision of health for all a reality. The arc that is bent towards health justice, therefore, is only ever bent under political and economic circumstances that continually bend history in the opposite direction towards health injustices and the systemic undermining of health systems. So-called neoliberal policies of deregulating markets and cutting social services to fund tax cuts for businesses tend thus to conditionalize the options for global health improvements. And related forms of neoliberal conditionality, which we will review in the course in relation to Washington Consensus Structural Adjustment Programs, or SAPs, have historically thwarted the ideals of advancing health for all. This is how the first arc, shaped by market forces, has come to cross and conflict with the second arc of global health politics that has been bent in the name of health justice. The 10 learning objectives for the course reflect the need to come to terms with all the historical and political processes that unfolded because of the influence of the two arcs I have just described. Now let's review these objectives. By the end of this class, you should have learned a lot. If you do all the readings, watch all the lectures, join all the discussions, and complete all the quizzes and writing assignments, you should, in short order, be able to do all of the following. First, describe the historical shifts in world politics that have led to the development of global health out of colonial health, tropical medicine, and international health. Second, outline the political economic impact of the debt crises of the 1980s and the subsequent impact of structural adjustment policies, or SAPs, on health systems in the global south. Third, theorize the changing governmental frameworks and assumptions for health policy in terms of evolving norms of neoliberalism associated with globalization. Fourth, recognize the changing governmental frameworks and political discourses associated with the impact of neoliberalism on health systems. Fifth, analyze the political economic factors and political actors governing global health policy options in particular countries in the global south. 6. Use health data, political economic data, and data visualization tools, including simple geovisualization methods, to depict health needs, outcomes, and policy options in particular countries in the global south. 7th, evaluate the long-term implications for health systems globally of current intellectual property innovation and distribution policy norms. 8th, develop a simplified application to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria and demonstrate an ability to conduct country-specific research on both health burdens and indicators of health services capacity. 9th, explain to fellow students and citizens the implications of theories of biopolitics, biological citizenship, and biological sub-citizenship for debates over global health. And 10th, engage with fellow students and fellow citizens concerned with making global health a reality globally, and not just a name for policies, programs, and courses like this one. Having reviewed the overall objectives, let's now turn to all the nitty-gritty logistics of the course organization on Canvas, your assignments, and how they will be graded. Remember that you can pause this lecture at any time to try out the screen review work that I'm talking about. So now, pull up Canvas on your computer and click into the course shell for GCH 186. Once you've got to the home page of the course, you can review the course learning objectives that we've already gone over and take a good close look at the Rivera mural, to which we will be returning in a moment. Next, double-click on the Assignments tab on the left-hand side. This will take you to the list of the main subtypes of assignments making up the coursework you will have to do in order to achieve the learning objectives. The first main type of assignment concerns the central research project and writing work that I'm setting for you in the course. This project involves putting together a mock proposal to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. It consists of 5 weekly subcomponents. Each one is effectively a building block for the final fifth one, where you have to put the whole proposal together to get global health funding for a country of your choice. You have to pick this country from a list of all eligible countries that qualify for global health funding from the Global Fund, funding support for their investments in global health programming around AIDS, TB, and malaria. The weekly building blocks allow you to come to terms with how individual poor countries in the Global South have to calculate gaps in their health services relating to the three big diseases, and then propose to address those gaps with new investments that are targeted to create the biggest health benefits for the dollars in funding expended. The overall exercise allows you to build knowledge about the health challenges in a particular country that is interesting to you personally, but it also allows you to gain expertise in how health programming is organized by a large global health agency, such as the Global Fund. In the process, you will discover how challenging it is for poor countries to address the many health burdens that they face that are distinct from AIDS, TB, and malaria. And along the way, therefore, you will also learn about how the lessons around diagonalization that are explained in the textbook can allow you to expand the vertically targeted funds allocated by the Global Fund in more inclusive ways that extend beyond just the three big diseases. As you can see from Canvas, these 5 components making up the Global Fund assignments in the course account for 40% of the overall course grade. The next 2 key assignments to put on your radar are the midterm and the final. Together, the 2 exams comprise 30% of the overall course grade, each one being worth 15% on its own. Both exams are timed and they are all online here in Canvas. They consist of multiple choice questions and a few true-false questions, with some matching lists thrown in as well. The exams are set up in a way where every student gets a randomized set of questions drawn from a question bank. This is obviously done to try to reduce cheating. The downside, from my perspective, of this online exam format is that it does not get at the more higher level kinds of thinking and analytical work that are so important to understanding global health politics. Nevertheless, it's still a good way of testing your knowledge about the basic readings and lecture materials introduced in the course. For the same reason, I want you to know that the midterm and final both build in basic ways on an additional component of your course grade, namely the weekly quizzes, which are based on the readings and lectures. So long as you do the readings and watch the lectures, these quizzes should prove to be easy. They are low-stakes ways of staying on top of the material. Finally, there are just 2 other assignment components that factor into your course grade. The first of which is for 10% of the overall course grade and consists of discussions and collaborative exercises here in Canvas that will take place each week asynchronously in a way that is designed to maximize your flexibility and involvement at the same time. The second involves report outs from each weekly synchronous session that also together add up to 10% of your overall course grade. These report outs on the synchronous sessions are designed to get you to show up for the sessions and participate with one another with your screens on. I really hope that the breakout groups in the synchronous sessions can thereby provide you with at least a little bit of community building opportunity despite the course being online. So that's it, the organization of the course in terms of the key assignments and grading components. Let's turn back now to the Diego Rivera mural and talk about how it illustrates, or at least indexes, a biosocial approach. First off, you need to have a definition of the biosocial approach. I would sum it up simply as an approach that puts health challenges and policies in their social context at the same time as analyzing them at a biophysical level. It means bringing together an interdisciplinary toolbox of analytical skills and knowledges, just like we're trying to do with the GCH degrees at UCSC. In this way, we are following Paul Farmer and his colleagues who argue that reimagining global health requires re-socializing our understanding of it. In Chapter 1, the authors argue in this way that clinical insights inform public health practice and public health analysis guides the distribution of medical resources. But we believe, and this is important what they add here, we believe both clinical medicine and public health must utilize the resocializing disciplines to address the fundamentally biosocial nature of global health problems. Microbes such as HIV and Mycobacterium tuberculosis cannot be understood properly at the molecular, clinical, experiential, or population level without analysis spanning the molecular to the social. So how can you best think about doing this scale-spanning analysis from the molecular to the social? One way to diagram it is using this graphic that was developed by my colleague Steve Gloyd at the University of Washington. Steve is a physician and a global health advocate who has also started a non-governmental organization called Health Alliance International. Based on all the experience of his work with Health Alliance International, Steve created this graphic of the determinants of global health outcomes running from the most molecular on the right to the most socialized and global in scale on the left. So you see on the right side some of the world's biggest disease burdens, which are all, of course, the topics of biomedical analysis and knowledge making. Medicine and biology continue to teach us a great deal about these diseases and their pathogenesis. Diarrhea, pneumonia, perinatal problems, HIV, malaria, measles, cardiovascular disease, and cancers, all of them can be analyzed purely in terms of their biophysical pathologies and the biological mechanisms through which they develop. However, this diagram highlights how to understand such diseases with a biosocial approach. We have to move analytically up the scales towards proximate, intermediate, and underlying or global scale determinants. Under the umbrella category of proximate causes of disease, public health scholarship teaches us a great deal about the context in which pathologies emerge. All sorts of proximate problems set the scene for disease. Malnutrition, water problems, sanitation problems, housing problems, health service problems, health behavior problems, and drug access problems all contribute to vulnerability to certain kinds of diseases. And this is where public health expertise is so crucial. In turn, we need social sciences to understand the intermediate and underlying global determinants of ill health. Poverty, inequality, deprivation, lack of access to education, employment conditions, civil strife, and war are all well-known determinants of the more proximate causes of disease like malnutrition. And globally, the underlying conditions of development or lack thereof drive disease most systematically of all. Capitalist neoliberalization involving unchecked market forces and structural adjustment programs imposing austerity on countries, systemic patriarchy, systemic racism, imperialism and militarism, and most globally of all now, climate crisis, all these things create conditions for ill health. A properly biosocial approach to examining disease burdens and what to do about them must therefore seek to resocialize analysis by moving up and down the scales, never forgetting the actual experience and suffering due to disease at the individual level, but always trying to put these embodied experiences of suffering and ill health into their wider social contexts of emergence. So let's turn finally to Diego Rivera's mural and explore how it suggests ways to socialize an analysis of health problems. Originally titled Man at the Crossroads, the mural was painted as a fresco by Rivera in 1933 and planned to be shown on the wall inside Rockefeller Center in New York City. It was designed as a kind of triptych, with a central panel depicting a male worker controlling machinery, flanked by two other panels: the frontier of ethical evolution under socialism on the right, and the frontier of material development under capitalism, counterintuitively shown on the left. The Rockefeller family had evidently approved of the mural's idea, but after a newspaper labeled it anti-capitalist propaganda, Nelson Rockefeller ordered Man at the Crossroads to be destroyed. Only black and white photographs exist of the original, but using these, Rivera repainted the composition in Mexico under the new title, Man, Controller of the Universe. So there's a lot going on here, both symbolically and politically. You can look at the mural through many different ideological perspectives. But what I want you to reflect on now and throughout the course is the way in which it also indexes a kind of biosocial imagination. It represents a man in control, perhaps, but it also shows him to be the subject of both biophysical forces and political economic forces at the same time. Whatever control he might imagine he has is therefore shown to be highly conditional, as well as perhaps sexist. And perhaps Rivera was urging audiences in this way to reflect on the limits of manly control as well, and perhaps even on the limits of a white man as a controller-in-chief at the crossroads. Indeed, the crossroads here are multiple, and some contemporary critical theorists may even find in the image a kind of illustration of intersectionality, a topic on which we will touch because of how it relates to arguments about disease syndemics emerging biosocially at the intersection of both social and bodily pathology. For now, though, I want to invite you to engage in a thought experiment turned art experiment. In short, I want you to imagine how you might remake the mural to illustrate the diverse biosocial forces that shaped our personal experiences of the COVID pandemic. Instead of man at the crossroads, I want you to remake the mural in PowerPoint or in another design program or of some kind, such as Canva or Google Slides, and put yourself at the center of the image. Then rethink some of the key social and political debates that went on through the pandemic and populate other parts of Rivera's mural with cut and paste images of figures who played a prominent part in our pandemic journey. And you've also got the virus itself to think about. Once you have redesigned the Rivera mural in a way that brings this biosocial approach up to date with a contemporary global health problem, please share your redesign in a discussion in Canvas and then comment in some constructive way on the redesign ideas of one of your fellow students. I hope you enjoy this opportunity to start thinking in a biosocial way about global health politics. To get you started and inspired, I want to end here by sharing some student designs from the previous offerings of this course. Looking forward to reviewing what you yourselves come up with and to all our lectures ahead. And finally, thanks for watching.